My name is Amina, and until that particular day, I believed I understood the direction my life was meant to take. At 36, I was a woman deeply committed to my faith, my family, and the simple pleasures of life. My daily routine revolved around raising my two children, supporting my husband, and fulfilling my responsibilities as a devout Muslim. On the surface, everything appeared flawless, but within me there was a quiet discomfort, a lingering doubt I couldn't quite shake. I was brought up in a highly religious home, where my parents taught me the Quran from a young age, and I grew up reciting prayers, fasting during Ramadan, and adhering to the rules that governed our lives. I believed fully, at least I thought I did. But as I aged, questions slowly began to form in my mind, questions I dared not speak aloud. I began to wonder about the nature of God, what would happen after death, and the countless rituals and rules we followed so strictly. Was it enough? Was it true? And more importantly, was I living the life I was meant to live? These thoughts often visited me at night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I would push them away, reminding myself that faith required submission, not questions. That day began like any other. It was Thursday, and my husband, Omar, had come home early from work, eager to spend time with the family. I spent the afternoon preparing a special dinner, a mix of dishes my children adored, and Omar's favorites. The kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of spices, and the sound of my children's laughter filled the air. We gathered around the table just after sunset. The children were talking about school, and Omar was sharing stories from his day. In that moment, I felt a rare sense of contentment. For a while, I could forget the doubts that sometimes lingered in the back of my mind. I watched my family with a smile, feeling grateful for these small, precious moments. But then, in the midst of our conversation, something happened. I had just taken a bite of food when I felt something lodge in my throat. At first, I thought it was nothing, just a brief discomfort that would pass. But as I tried to swallow, I realized I couldn't breathe. My hands flew to my throat and I looked at Omar, panic rising in my chest. "Amina, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with alarm. I couldn't respond. My chest tightened and fear flooded over me as I gasped for air, but none came. Omar leapt out of his chair, rushing to my side and shouting for the children to call for help. My son, just 9 years old, grabbed the phone with shaking hands while my daughter clung to her brother, tears running down her face. Omar did everything he could think of, back blows, the Heimlich maneuver, but nothing worked. I saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation. My vision started to blur and my legs felt weak, as though they were about to give way. I collapsed to the floor, clutching my throat as the room spun around me. I could hear Omar shouting my name, his voice cracking with emotion. The world around me faded, and I felt my strength draining away. I thought about my children, my husband, and the life I had worked so hard to build. I wasn't ready to leave them. I wasn't ready for this to be the end. As everything went black, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. The fear and panic that had gripped me moments before slowly faded, replaced by an overwhelming stillness. It was as though I had stepped out of time, out of my body, and into something entirely different. I thought, this is it. This is the end. But as the darkness deepened, I began to sense something beyond it. A presence, a sensation that was both unfamiliar and yet oddly comforting. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, and in that moment I realized this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. When the darkness lifted, I found myself in a place I had never seen or imagined before. At first, it was hard to grasp. There was no ground beneath me, no sky above, no walls enclosing the space. It was as though I were floating in an endless expanse of light, soft, warm, and alive. The light wasn't like the sun or a lamp. It seemed to have its own presence. It surrounded me, filling every part of me with a peace so deep it felt as if the weight I had carried throughout my life had simply vanished. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I didn't feel afraid, anxious, or burdened by the expectations and responsibilities that had defined my life. It was as if I had been carrying an invisible weight for so long that I had forgotten it was there. And now, all of a sudden, I was free. The feeling was so overwhelming that tears welled up in my eyes, not from sadness, but from a joy so pure it was beyond words. I looked around, trying to understand where I was. The place, if you could even call it that, wasn't bound by the physical laws of the world. There were no shadows, no edges, no sense of distance or time. It felt infinite and yet intimate all at once. The light wasn't just around me, it was within me, filling me with a sense of wholeness I had never known. It was as though every question, every doubt I had ever carried was momentarily silenced, replaced by an unshakable certainty. I was safe, I was loved, and I was not alone. Yet, despite the peace, there was something unfamiliar about it all. This wasn't what I had been taught to expect. Growing up, I had been told that after death, there would be a reckoning, a crossing of a narrow bridge, a weighing of deeds, and a judgment that would decide whether one entered paradise or faced punishment. But here there was no bridge, no scales, no throne of judgment. There was only the light and the overwhelming sense of love that enveloped me. I began to wonder, where am I? The question wasn't born from fear, but from curiosity. This place, this feeling didn't match what I had been taught, yet it felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. As I stood, or floated, or simply existed, it was hard to say. I became aware of a presence. It was subtle at first, like a gentle nudge at the edge of my awareness. But as time passed, I felt it more strongly. It wasn't threatening or intrusive. In fact, it was the opposite. Comforting, reassuring, and deeply familiar, though I couldn't place why. This presence wasn't something I could see, but I could feel it everywhere. It was as if the light itself carried a consciousness, an awareness, focused entirely on me. It knew me, not just the person I showed the world, but the real me. It knew my fears, my doubts, my failures, and my regrets. Yet, there was no judgment, no condemnation, only love. I felt my heart, or whatever part of me existed here, begin to open. Memories of my life surfaced, not in a chaotic rush, but in a soft, almost tender way. I saw moments from my childhood, my wedding day, the births of my children. I saw the times I had been kind, the times I had been selfish, the times I had doubted, and the times I had believed. It was all laid bare, yet I felt no shame. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of being understood. But there was something else, something stirring deep within my soul. A realization that this presence, this love, was unlike anything I had ever encountered before. It wasn't distant or impersonal. It wasn't a list of rules or a set of do's and don'ts. It was personal, intimate, and all-encompassing. As I tried to process what I was feeling, I noticed something in the distance, or rather what I thought was the distance. In this place, concepts like near and far didn't seem to apply. What I saw was a shape, faint and indistinct, but undeniably there. It seemed to be drawing closer, though it didn't move in any conventional way. It was as though it was both coming toward me and already present. The presence grew stronger, more defined. It wasn't overwhelming or frightening, but inviting, like the open arms of a loved one you hadn't seen in years. Then, through the light, I heard it. A voice. It wasn't like any voice I had ever heard before. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't soft either. It didn't come from outside me, but from within, resonating through every part of me. It was rich and warm, filled with a love so profound that it brought tears to my eyes. And yet, there was a strength to it, an authority that made it clear this was no ordinary voice. Amina, it said, speaking my name with such tenderness that my heart both broke and healed in the same instant. I froze, my entire being attuned to that voice. It was unlike anything I had ever known, familiar and unfamiliar, comforting and awe-inspiring. It carried with it a weight, a significance that I couldn't fully understand. This wasn't just a voice, it was something far greater than anything I had ever known. I could grasp the situation, and then I saw him. The figure emerged from the light not as a shadow or outline, but as a presence so radiant and pure that it took my breath away, if I even had breath in this place. Every part of me trembled, not out of fear, but out of reverence, as I realized I was in the presence of the divine. Everything I thought I understood was about to be turned upside down. When I first laid eyes on him, I had no idea who he was. The figure that came from the light carried with him the weight of eternity, yet he moved with such gentleness and grace that I couldn't look away. His presence was overwhelming, but not in a way that frightened me. Instead, it made me feel unworthy. I wanted to fall to my knees, but in this place I had no body to move. It felt as if my soul itself was trembling in awe. He stepped closer, and though he said nothing at first, his eyes met mine, and everything I thought I knew began to unravel. His gaze wasn't just kind, it was pure, as though he could see into the deepest parts of my heart, into the parts of myself I had hidden, even from me. Yet there was no judgment in his eyes, only love. I don't know how long we stood there in silence, but we were connected in a way I had never felt before. Time didn't seem to exist here. It could have been moments, hours, or longer. All I knew was that in his presence I felt whole, seen, and at home. Finally, he spoke. His voice was like the light surrounding him, alive, warm, and filled with a love so powerful that I felt my soul stir with each word. "Amina," he said, his tone gentle yet firm, as though he had always known me. "You are deeply loved." Those words hit me like a wave. Loved, deeply loved. It was a concept I thought I understood, but in his presence I realized I had never truly known what it meant. I had spent my life trying to earn love through obedience, good deeds, endless prayers, and rituals. But here was this figure, this man, telling me I was already loved, without conditions, without striving, without fear. "Who are you?" I finally asked, my voice trembling with awe and confusion. "I am Jesus," he said simply. The name sent a shock through me. Jesus, it couldn't be. I had heard his name before, of course, but never in a way that felt relevant to my life. Growing up, I had been taught that Jesus was a prophet, a good and righteous man, but nothing more, certainly not the Son of God as Christians claimed. That idea had always seemed blasphemous, but here he was, standing before me, and everything about him defied what I thought I knew. He wasn't just a man. He wasn't just a prophet. His presence radiated authority, a divinity that was undeniable. I didn't understand it, but I couldn't deny it. "You can't be," I whispered, shaking my head. "I was taught that you were just a prophet." His expression didn't change. There was no anger, no frustration, no offense. Instead, his eyes softened, and he took a step closer. "I know what you've been taught," he said gently. "I know the questions you've carried, the doubts you've buried, and the fears that have stopped you from asking. But I am here to tell you the truth. Not because I want to condemn you, but because I want to set you free." Tears began to stream down my face as his words settled over me like a balm. Free. That was what I had longed for, wasn't it? To be free from uncertainty, from the fear of never being good enough, from constantly striving to prove my worth. But how could I reconcile what he was saying with everything I had believed for my entire life? "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? Why now? What is this place?" "This," he said, gesturing to the light around us, "is not a place in the way you think of it. It is a glimpse of what awaits, a glimpse of the love that created you, the love that calls to you even now." I felt a lump rise in my throat as he spoke. His words resonated with the truth I couldn't explain, but they also stirred a deep fear. If what he was saying was true, then everything I had believed, everything I had built my life on, was incomplete. "What about Allah?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What about everything I was taught? Was it all wrong?" Jesus didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer and looked at me with such tenderness that I felt my fear start to melt away. "Amina," he said, "you have always sought to honor God. Your prayers, your devotion, your longing for truth, they were not in vain. But the fullness of God's love is found in me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." The words hit me like lightning. I had heard them before, but always from the outside, dismissing them as misguided. Now, standing before the one who spoke them, I couldn't deny their power. They weren't just words, they were alive, resonating deep within me, shaking the very foundation of my beliefs. I wanted to argue, to question, to push back. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized something profound. He wasn't asking me to understand everything in that moment. He wasn't asking me to have all the answers. He was simply asking me to trust him. "I don't know if I can," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I've spent my whole life believing something else. How can I just let it go?" "You don't have to do it alone," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "I will be with you every step of the way. This is not about abandoning everything you've known. It's about embracing the truth of who I am and the love that has always been reaching out to you." I felt something inside me begin to shift, a crack in the walls I had built around my heart. For so long I had clung to my beliefs out of fear, fear of being wrong, fear of losing my identity, fear of what others would think. But here, in this place, standing before Jesus, I felt that fear begin to fade. In its place was something new, hope. "I don't know what to do," I said finally, tears streaming down my face. "You don't have to know," he said. "You just have to trust. Let me show you." And then he told me he had something important to show me, something that would change everything. As the light around us began to shift, I felt a sense of anticipation mixed with awe. Whatever was coming next, I knew it would leave me forever changed. The light around us began to swirl like a living canvas, vibrant and dynamic. I felt Jesus' presence steady beside me as the world I had just left seemed to unfold before my eyes. Not the way I remembered it, but in a way that revealed truths I had never seen before. "Look," he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "This is the world as it is." The first thing I saw was a bustling city filled with people going about their daily lives. It seemed normal at first, commuters rushing to work, children playing in the streets, families gathering in parks. But as I watched, something beneath the surface began to reveal itself. There was an underlying tension, an invisible weight pressing down on everyone. I could feel their anxiety, their fears, their struggles. It was as if they were all carrying burdens too heavy to bear, but they kept moving, pretending they weren't there. I saw families sitting together, but they weren't really together. Each person was lost in their own world, staring at screens, scrolling through endless feeds, disconnected from one another. I saw people chasing wealth, status, and possessions, believing that happiness lay just beyond the next achievement or purchase. But their faces told a different story, one of exhaustion, emptiness, and longing. "This," Jesus said softly, "is what happens when people lose sight of what truly matters. They search for fulfillment in things that cannot satisfy, in places that cannot provide meaning." As I watched, the scene changed. I saw nations divided, people turning against one another over politics, race, religion, and ideology. The cracks of division ran deep, and I could see the pain and anger that fueled them. It was heartbreaking to witness. The more people clung to their differences, the wider the cracks grew, creating chasms that seemed impossible to bridge. "Why is it like this?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "Because they have forgotten me," Jesus said, his tone filled with both sorrow and hope. "When love is replaced by fear, when faith is replaced by doubt, and when unity is replaced by division, this is the result. But it does not have to be this way." The light shifted again, and suddenly I saw people kneeling in prayer, their faces illuminated with a quiet strength. These were not the same people I had seen earlier. These were individuals who had chosen to live differently. They weren't perfect, but they were sincere, and their faith shone like beacons in the darkness. "These are my children," Jesus said, his voice filled with love. "They have chosen to walk in faith, to love others as I have loved them, and to seek me above all else. Their lives are not without struggles, but they have found the peace and purpose that come from knowing me." I watched as these individuals reached out to others, offering kindness, forgiveness, and hope. I saw communities transformed by their actions, places of despair becoming places of joy and renewal. The cracks I had seen earlier began to heal, replaced by connections of love and unity. The vision expanded, and I saw families sitting together, truly present with one another. Parents teaching their children about faith, couples supporting each other in prayer, neighbors helping one another in times of need. These weren't grand gestures or dramatic changes. They were simple acts of love and faith that rippled outward, creating waves of transformation. "Faith is the key," Jesus said, his gaze steady and full of compassion. "When people turn to me, when they place their trust in my love and my truth, the world begins to heal. It is not an easy path, but it is the only one that leads to true peace." I kept watching, seeing moments of breathtaking beauty, acts of forgiveness that healed fractured relationships, sacrifices made for the good of others, and lives restored through the power of faith. But I also witnessed the consequences of choosing a different path. The divisions grew deeper in areas where people held onto anger, greed, and pride. The rifts became so deep that they swallowed entire communities, leaving destruction in their wake. "This," Jesus said, his tone steady, yet gentle, "is the choice each person must make. To live for themselves or to live for something greater, to hold on to the things of this world or to accept the love and truth that can change it." Tears streamed down my face as the weight of what I was seeing sank in. I reflected on my own life, the times I had chosen fear over faith, pride over humility, and selfishness over love. I thought of the doubts I had carried, the questions I had been too afraid to ask, and the ways I had failed to live in alignment with the truth Jesus was showing me. "What about me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What can I do? I'm just one person." He turned toward me, his eyes filled with such profound love that it brought me to my knees. "Amina," he said, "your life is not insignificant in my eyes. Every act of love, every step of faith, every moment of surrender to me creates ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. You're not called to change the whole world, but to let me change you so others can see my love through you." I felt a surge of hope wash over me. The vastness of the vision no longer felt daunting because I understood that I wasn't alone. It wasn't about my strength or abilities. It was about trusting in His. As the vision started to fade, Jesus looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race. "There's more," he said, "more for you to see, more for you to do. But you must understand this. It's not just about you, it's about everyone." His words resonated deep within me as the light shifted again, and I braced myself for what would come next. The vision faded, and I found myself once again surrounded by the all-encompassing light and overwhelming presence of Jesus. My heart still raced from all I had witnessed, the cracks in the world, the sparks of light, the potential for transformation. It felt as though my entire understanding of existence had been flipped upside down. Yet, at the same time, everything seemed to make perfect sense. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it was true. Turning to Jesus, my thoughts a whirlwind of questions and emotions, I asked, "Why are you showing me this? Why me?" His gaze was filled with love and compassion, as though all my fears and doubts had been lifted in an instant. "Amina," he said, "I've known you since the beginning. I've seen your struggles, your questions, your yearning for truth. You've always sought to honor God, and now I am revealing the fullness of who I am so you can know the truth and share it with others." His words pierced my heart. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn God's favor, striving to follow rituals and rules, but always feeling like something was missing. Now, in His presence, I realized that what I had been searching for wasn't something I could earn. It was a freely given gift through His love. "How can I share this?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "What you've shown me, what I've felt here, it's too big. No one will believe me. They'll think I'm crazy." He stepped closer, his gaze steady and filled with reassurance. "You are not alone," he said. "I will be with you. The message isn't about you. It's about me and my love for all people. Speak the truth, live the truth, and trust that I will work through you." A lump formed in my throat as his words settled in. Part of me wanted to stay in this place, to remain in the peace and love that surrounded me. But deep down, I knew he was right. What I had experienced wasn't meant to stay with me. It was meant to be shared. Sensing my hesitation, Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. "Amina," he said gently but firmly, "it is not your time yet. There is more for you to do." The weight of his words filled me with both a sense of purpose and a slight fear. "How will I know what to do?" I asked. "How will I know where to begin?" "Start with love," he replied simply. "Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love others as yourself. Let everything you do flow from that place, and you will find your way." He paused, as if giving me time to absorb what he had said. Then his tone grew more urgent. "The world is at a crossroads," he said. "There is so much division, so much pain, but there is also hope. You have seen what is possible when people turn to me. That is the message you must share, that it's not too late, that my love is for everyone, and that through faith the cracks in the world can be healed." A deep sense of responsibility settled over me as the vision of the world's potential, the points of light spreading hope and unity, burned into my memory. I knew I couldn't ignore it. "I'll try," I whispered, barely able to speak. "I don't know if I'll be strong enough, but I'll try." "You don't have to be strong enough," he said with a faint smile. "My strength will carry you. Trust in me and I will guide you." For a moment, the light around us seemed to brighten, as though it were responding to his words. I felt a warm peace spread through me, filling every part of my being with a comfort I couldn't describe. It was as though I was being prepared for what lay ahead, equipped with everything I would need to face the challenges in front of me. Then Jesus stepped back and the light shifted again. I felt a strange sensation, as though I was being gently pulled away from this place, drawn back to something I couldn't yet see. Panic began to rise in my chest. "Wait," I said, my voice trembling. "What if I forget? What if I fail?" "You won't," he said, his voice steady and full of assurance. "My words will stay in your heart, and I will be with you always. Trust in that, Amina. Trust in me." The sensation of being pulled grew stronger, and I realized that this moment was coming to an end. But before I could speak again, Jesus' voice echoed through the light one last time. "Go and share my love with the world." His words reverberated deep within me as the light around me began to fade. The overwhelming peace and warmth gave way to a new sensation, one of heaviness, of weight. I could feel my body again, the ache in my chest, the pressure of the world pulling me back into itself. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the blurry outline of a hospital ceiling. The harsh fluorescent lights were a stark contrast to the radiant living light I had just left behind. I blinked, trying to adjust as the sound of voices reached my ears, frantic, full of relief and urgency. "She's awake!" someone shouted. "She's breathing!" I turned my head slightly and saw Omar, my husband, sitting beside me, tears streaming down his face. His hands were gripping mine so tightly it almost hurt. "Amina," he said, his voice breaking, "you're back. Thank God you're back." I wanted to speak, to tell him everything, but the words wouldn't come. My body felt heavy, my throat raw, and my mind was still reeling from everything I had experienced. But one thing was clear. I couldn't return to the life I had before. Something had changed, and it wasn't just me. It was everything. As I lay there, staring at the faces of my family and the sterile walls of the hospital room, I could still hear Jesus' voice, clear and unwavering, echoing in my heart. "Go and share my love with the world." When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I noticed was the harsh fluorescent light above me. It felt cold and sterile compared to the radiant, living light I had just left behind. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. The weight of my body felt foreign, like an anchor pulling me back into the world. Then I heard familiar voices, and everything came rushing back. "Amina, she's awake." Omar's voice cracked as he called my name, and before I could fully process what was happening, his face appeared above mine. His eyes were red, and tears streamed freely down his cheeks. I had never seen him cry before. He gripped my hand tightly, almost as though he was afraid I would slip away again. "You're back," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank God you're back." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and all I could manage was a faint rasp. Omar immediately grabbed a cup of water from the bedside table and held it to my lips, his hands trembling. The cool liquid felt like a lifeline, grounding me in the reality of the moment. I took a few sips, then closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Around me, the room began to take shape. I lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines, softly beeping and humming, while my sister Aisha stood at the foot of the bed, holding a tissue and wiping her eyes. My two children sat nearby, their faces pale and filled with worry. When they noticed me stir, they quickly rushed to my side, their little hands reaching out to touch me. "Mama," my youngest asked, her voice shaky, "are you okay?" I wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything was fine and that everything would be okay. But the words caught in my throat. How could I explain what I had just gone through? How could I find the right words to describe a love so deep, a peace so overwhelming, and a truth that had shaken everything I thought I knew? "I'm here," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. "I'm okay." The room filled with a mixture of relieved sobs and joyful exclamations. Omar leaned over, kissed my forehead, and murmured a prayer of thanks. My sister embraced the children tightly, tears streaming down her face. For them, this moment was a miracle, and indeed it was. But for me, it marked the beginning of something far more significant. As the hours passed, the initial wave of relief and celebration gave way to a flood of questions. The doctors came in to explain what had happened. They told me I had choked on a piece of food, causing a lack of oxygen and cardiac arrest. By the time the paramedics arrived, I had been clinically dead for several minutes. They said it was a miracle I survived without any brain damage or long-term complications. "You're incredibly lucky," one of the doctors remarked, shaking his head in disbelief, but I knew luck had nothing to do with it. While my family focused on my physical recovery, my mind was consumed by the images and words I had encountered during those moments of death. The memory of the light, the immense love, and Jesus' message echoed relentlessly in my mind. I couldn't stop replaying the vision of the world, the cracks, the points of light, and the message he gave me. "Go and share my love with the world." But how could I share this? How could I explain something so extraordinary without sounding unbelievable? I had grown up in a community where faith was rigid and unquestionable, where doubt was seen as weakness, and any deviation from tradition was met with suspicion. I knew that what I had experienced would likely be met with skepticism, if not outright rejection. That night, after my family had left and the hospital room grew quiet, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My body ached and my throat still felt raw, but my mind was alive with questions. I had been given a chance to live differently, to share what I had seen and learned. But the weight of that responsibility was overwhelming. I thought about Omar, how he had prayed so fervently when I was unconscious, and the relief on his face when I woke up. Would he believe me if I told him about Jesus? Would he listen to my experience, or would he dismiss it as a hallucination brought on by the trauma of choking and almost dying? I thought about my sister, my children, and my community. How would they react? Would they see me as a traitor to my faith, someone who had turned her back on her upbringing? The thought of their judgment made my chest tighten, but I couldn't deny the truth of what I had experienced. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. The next morning, Omar returned to the hospital early, bringing me fresh clothes and my favorite tea. He sat beside my bed, holding my hand as we talked about the kids, the doctor's updates, and how thankful he was that I was back. I could see the concern in his eyes, though he kept glancing at me as if he sensed there was something I wasn't saying. Finally, he spoke. "Amina," he said gently, "I know something happened to you while you were gone. I can see it in your eyes. You're different. What is it?" His words took me by surprise, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. I looked down at our hands, my heart racing. This was the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. "I don't know how to explain it," I finally said, my voice trembling. "But while I was gone, I saw something. I met someone." Omar's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, urging me to continue. "I saw Jesus," I blurted out, the words tumbling from my mouth before I could stop them. "He spoke to me. He showed me things. Things about the world, about love, about faith. He told me. He told me that it's not my time yet, that I need to share what I've seen." Omar's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought he might laugh or dismiss me. Instead, he squeezed my hand tighter. "Amina," he said slowly, "are you sure? Are you absolutely sure it was him?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It wasn't a dream, Omar. It was real. He was real." Omar sat back in his chair, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and something I couldn't quite place. "This is a lot to take in," he said finally. "I don't know what to think, but I believe you." His words gave me a glimmer of hope, but I knew this was just the beginning. I had shared my truth, but how it would be received by others and what it would mean for my life was still uncertain. When Omar and I returned home from the hospital, there was a quiet unease between us. He was gentle and attentive, visibly grateful that I was alive, but I could tell he was holding back. He was the type of man who dealt with things practically, preferring to fix problems rather than dwell on them. Yet this wasn't something that could be fixed or ignored. It was a truth I could no longer keep inside. That night, after we put the kids to bed, we sat together in the living room. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Omar handed me a cup of tea, his expression soft but cautious. I could tell he was waiting for me to speak, but the words felt stuck in my throat. How could I explain what I had experienced? Where would I even begin? Finally, he broke the silence. "Amina," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you've been different since you woke up. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you talk, even in the way you look at the kids. Something happened to you, didn't it?" I nodded, my hands trembling as I clutched the tea. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Something extraordinary happened." He leaned forward, his gaze intense but filled with concern. Tell me, he urged. Please, I need to understand. I took a deep breath, my heart racing in my chest. When I was unconscious, I began, I didn't just lose awareness. I went somewhere. It wasn't a dream, Omar. It was real. He frowned slightly, but didn't interrupt, so I continued. I was in this place, this incredible place filled with light and peace. It wasn't like anything I've ever known. The light wasn't just around me, it was within me. It felt alive, as if it were holding me, protecting me. My voice faltered as I prepared to say the words I knew would change everything. I met someone. Omar tilted his head, his expression shifting to one of guarded curiosity. Who? He asked cautiously. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Jesus. His reaction was immediate. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes widening in shock. Jesus, he repeated, his tone a mix of disbelief and confusion. You mean the Christian Jesus? Yes, I said, my voice trembling. He was there, Omar. He spoke to me. He showed me things, things about the world, about faith, about love. He told me the truth. Omar ran a hand through his hair, his face clouded with doubt. Amina, are you sure? I mean, you were unconscious. Maybe it was just a dream or your mind playing tricks on you. The doctor said you were without oxygen for a while. That can cause hallucinations. I shook my head firmly. No, Omar, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He was real. His presence, his love. It was so overwhelming, so undeniable. I can still feel it, even now. He stared at me, his brow furrowed as if trying to process what I was saying. But why Jesus? He asked. Why not Allah? That's what we've always believed. That's what we were taught. I don't know, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. But what I do know is that everything I believed before, everything I thought I understood, it wasn't enough. Jesus showed me the truth, Omar. He showed me that God's love isn't about rules or rituals or trying to earn his favor. It's about grace. It's about surrendering to him completely. And it's through Jesus that we can truly know that love. Omar was silent for a long time, his expression unreadable. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the battle between his rational mind and the words I was speaking. Finally, he said, Amina, you've always been strong in your faith. You've always been the one to guide me, to remind me of our prayers and duties. And now you're saying all of that was wrong. I'm not saying it was wrong, I said gently. I'm saying it was incomplete. I spent my entire life trying to follow the rules, trying to be good enough. But it was never enough. Jesus showed me that it's not about what we do. It's about what he's already done for us. His love is the answer, Omar. It's the only thing that can truly fill the emptiness we've both felt. He looked at me sharply, his eyes narrowing. What emptiness? He asked, his voice defensive. I hesitated, then said, the emptiness we never talk about. The doubts you've had but were too afraid to share. The questions we've both buried because we were taught not to ask. I could sense it, Omar. I know you felt it too. His shoulder sagged slightly as he let out a long sigh, maybe admitting with some reluctance that there had been moments when he, too, wondered if we were missing something. But he never expected it to lead to this. He shook his head as if trying to shake off his thoughts, saying, I never imagined it would end up like this. I didn't either, I replied softly. But now that I've seen it, I can't turn back. Jesus revealed to me what the world could be like if we released our pride, our fears, and our need to control everything. He showed me the power of love, forgiveness, and faith. And he told me it's not too late, Omar. It's never too late for any of us. Omar leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. I'm not sure what to think, he said finally. This is so much to take in, Amina. It goes against everything we've been taught. But I can see that you believe it. I can see it's changed you. "It has," I said, tears running down my face. "And I don't expect you to understand it all right away. I'm still trying to grasp it myself, but all I'm asking is that you keep an open heart. Ask the questions you've been afraid to ask. Seek the truth. I promise you'll find it." He nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as if lost in thought. "I'm not sure I can believe what you're saying," he admitted, "but I do believe you. And if what you're saying is true, then I owe it to myself to find out." For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. His doubt was still there, but there was something else too. A spark of curiosity, a willingness to confront the questions he had kept buried for so long. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a start. As we sat together in the quiet of our living room, I realized that this conversation was just the beginning. The road ahead would be tough, filled with challenges and uncertainty. But for the first time, we were asking the questions we had always been too afraid to voice. And that, I knew, was the first step toward uncovering the truth. When Omar and I began this journey, it felt like stepping into uncharted waters, a place neither of us had ever imagined, something that both terrified and excited us. In the weeks after I shared my experience, the house seemed quieter, as though the walls themselves were adjusting to the massive shift in our lives. There were no arguments or heated debates, just cautious curiosity and a silent understanding to take it one step at a time. At first, it was just me. I began waking up early, long before the kids, to sit in the stillness of our living room with the Bible I had bought secretly online. Holding it felt strange at first, almost like betraying everything I had been taught. But as I opened its pages, I was struck by the words of grace, love, and redemption that jumped out at me. It was so different from the rigid rule-following I had grown up with. These words weren't about earning favor or proving worth. They were about a relationship, about trust, about faith. Omar would occasionally walk by, glancing at me with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. I could see the unspoken questions in his eyes, but he wasn't ready to voice them. I didn't pressure him. I wanted him to come to this in his own time, in his own way. One evening, as I sat reading by the lamp's soft glow, Omar entered the room and sat beside me. At first, he said nothing, just stared at the book in my hands. After a while, he asked, "What are you reading?" I paused for a moment before handing him the Bible. "It's the Gospel of John," I said quietly. "It's beautiful," he said, taking the book carefully, almost reverently, as if it were something fragile. He didn't open it right away, but stared at the cover for a long time. "Would you read it to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart swelling with hope. I turned to the passage I had been reading and began to read aloud. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." As the words filled the room, I looked at Omar. His expression was unreadable, but I could see his mind working. He didn't say much that night, but the next morning I found him flipping through the pages on his own. It was a small step, but it was everything. In the following weeks, we began to explore this new faith together. We found a local church, a small yet welcoming community that held Sunday services and Bible study throughout the week. Walking into that building for the first time was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. I felt like everyone was staring at us, like we didn't belong. But as the service started and the congregation sang worship songs, I felt a warmth wash over me, a familiar presence, as if Jesus himself were there, reminding me we were exactly where we needed to be. Omar was more reserved, keeping quiet during the service and staying to himself afterward. But he kept returning, week after week. Slowly, I began to notice a change in him. He was softer, more thoughtful, and more willing to discuss things he had once avoided. One night, as we lay in bed, he turned to me and said, "I think I get it now. It's not about rules or traditions. It's about love. That's what we've been missing." Of course, it wasn't all easy. Word began to spread through our community, and the reactions were mixed. Some of our closest friends distanced themselves from us, their polite smiles hiding judgment and disapproval. There were whispers, sidelong glances, and even confrontations. One neighbor told Omar, "You're turning your back on your faith, on your heritage. How could you do this to your family?" Omar stood firm, his voice steady but kind. "I'm not turning my back on anything," he said. "I'm following the truth as I've come to understand it. That doesn't mean I've stopped caring about where I came from. It just means I've found something greater." It was difficult, and there were moments when we both felt the weight of the criticism. But every time it became too much, we turned to prayer. Together, we would sit in the quiet of our living room, holding hands, asking God for strength, wisdom, and the courage to keep going. And every time, without fail, we felt His presence, reminding us that we weren't alone. What surprised me most was the effect our journey had on others. At first, it was subtle. A few family members began asking quiet questions, their voices full of curiosity rather than judgment. "What is it about this Jesus that's so different?" they would ask. "Why does He mean so much to you?" We answered honestly, sharing our experiences without pushing anything on them. We told them about the peace we had found, the love that had changed our hearts, and the hope that now guided our lives. Some dismissed it, but others listened, and slowly those conversations began to plant seeds. One evening, Omar's younger brother, who had always been skeptical about religion, came to our house uninvited. He sat with us for hours, asking question after question about Jesus, the Bible, and what it meant to have faith. By the end of the night, he said, "I don't know if I'm ready to believe, but I want to understand more." It wasn't just our family. Friends and neighbors began noticing the change in us, the way we treated each other, the way we spoke, and the sense of peace that seemed to fill our home. They couldn't explain it, but they were drawn to it. Little by little, our story began to spread, reaching people we hadn't expected. As I sat one evening, reflecting on everything that had happened since my experience, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. What had started as a deeply personal journey, something I thought would be just for me, had grown into something much bigger. It had brought my family closer, strengthened our faith, and inspired others to seek the truth for themselves. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Not because I had all the answers, but because I knew where to find them. And I knew that this was just the beginning. What had started as my personal journey became a spark of hope for others. For that, I would be forever thankful. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has happened, I'm overwhelmed by the enormity of how my life has changed. What began as an ordinary evening with my family, just a simple meal, a moment that could have been forgotten, turned into the most extraordinary experience I could ever imagine. That one moment of stepping beyond the boundaries of life and death didn't just change me. It changed my family and everyone around us. The days following my near-death experience were among the most difficult yet most rewarding of my life. Facing doubts, questions, and sometimes outright rejection wasn't easy, but every step of the way I felt a deep and unwavering peace, reminding me that I was on the right path. That peace didn't come from my own strength, but from the one who met me in the light, who spoke to me with love, who showed me the truth. Jesus changed my life. There's no other way to say it. I went from someone who lived in fear of not being enough, someone who clung to rules and rituals out of a desperate desire to please God, to someone who finally understood what it meant to be loved unconditionally. That love didn't depend on how perfect I was, or how many prayers I said, or how strictly I followed the rules. It was simply there, waiting for me to accept it. It wasn't just my life that changed. Omar has become my partner in faith in a way I never thought possible. Watching his journey, his cautious steps toward understanding, his willingness to ask hard questions, and his eventual surrender to the truth of God's love has been one of the greatest joys of my life. We've grown closer as a couple, not just because of shared beliefs, but because we've learned to love each other with the kind of love Jesus showed me: selfless, patient, and full of grace. Our family has transformed too. Our children are growing up in a home filled with peace, hope, and a deep sense of purpose. We teach them about God's love, not as a list of rules to follow, but as a relationship to cherish. They've started asking big questions about life, faith, and what it means to love others. And every time I hear their little voices praying, my heart swells with gratitude. But what amazes me the most is how far the ripple effects of my experience have spread. People who once doubted me, who dismissed my story as a dream or hallucination, have returned with questions. They've seen the changes in our lives, the peace and joy that now define our family, and they can't ignore it. And for those who are willing to listen, I share my story not to convince or argue, but simply to plant a seed of hope. That's what this is all about: hope. The hope that no matter where you are in life, no matter what you've done, or how far you think you've strayed, it's never too late to find the truth. God's love is waiting for you, just as it was waiting for me. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or how many mistakes you've made. That love is there, always. All you have to do is open your heart to it. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this: you are deeply loved just as you are. You don't have to earn it, and you don't have to be perfect to receive it. You only have to say yes. Yes to the love that created you. Yes to the truth that sets you free. And yes to the light that can guide you through even the darkest moments. For those of you watching this, I encourage you to take a moment and reflect. Are you truly at peace with where you are in life? Are you chasing things that can't satisfy, or are you seeking the love and purpose that only God can provide? My story isn't just about me, it's a reminder that transformation is possible for anyone. All it takes is one step of faith, one prayer, one moment of surrender. Thank you for taking the time to hear my story. I hope it inspires you to seek the truth for yourself and embrace the love that is always reaching out to you.